So some of the more interesting research that has come out of this area called effective neuroscience, which looks at meditation and meditative practices and the effect on the brain, comes out of a lab in Wisconsin, at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, where Richie Davison, who's become this wonderfully articulate and this voice for mindfulness, meditation, neuroscience, looked at long-term meditators who were connected to an EEG, where they were able to look at brain waves. And they found that long-term meditators who had about 10,000 hours or more of meditation under their belts, and so they were considered experts at meditation, compared to people who were just learning to meditate, had, when they began to meditate, and this was a non-referential, compassionate-based meditation, so they were thinking very open-hearted thoughts in a very general sense, that there was this shift of activation in the brain to the left anterior portion of the cortex, which had previously been found by him to be associated with happiness and positive thinking, and that these were, importantly, gamma waves. So this is a high oscillating frequency. So when long-term meditators were beginning to meditate, they found this instant shift of this activity in the brain to the left anterior portion, and they found that these gamma waves were taking hold. And gamma waves are important because their frequency and their nature is one of integrating the brain. So they have this integrating quality to them compared to the people who were just beginning to meditate. They too had a slight increase, right, in the gamma wave activity. But it was nowhere near as pronounced as you might imagine from this, in some cases, higher than ever recorded before findings. And then when they stopped meditating, they found that for 5 minutes, this high frequency maintained itself. So this showed a bunch of interesting things. First, it showed that when you do move into a contemplative, when you do move into a meditative state, you do have this shift, which is a very positive in many, many respects. They also had it where even those who were just beginning to meditate would evidence a bit of this shift, and so that was showing that you don't have to be doing it for 10,000 hours to have this effect, but that also that these effects are enduring, that those who had been doing it for a long time had a slightly higher level before there was any meditation going on. So when they were just sitting there getting ready, they were already a little higher, then they did jump, but then also they stayed high afterward compared to the control group where it just dropped right back. So this is one of the early pieces of research that was showing, which again was only in the last 10 or so years, which was showing the effectiveness of a contemplative practice on the structure and function, in this case the function of the brain. One of the first early on, like in the mid-90s, I did a workshop with Anna Wise. She's phenomenal. She's over in Marion County. She does this research where they do hook up and look at alpha frequencies and beta frequencies and delta and theta frequencies in the brain. You're just anybody, so it's not like it's a group of long-term meditators. And what she's done is she's looked at people who have their aha moments, mathematicians, Zen, as well as like Zen masters. And when these electrodes are hooked up to their brain so they can look at the different frequencies that are being emitted, and we know that beta waves are a lot of chatter, so when you're busy thinking and worrying and fretting, there's a lot of beta waves. Alpha waves seem to be this integrative wave, so that when there's alpha waves, it's sort of integrating the thinking mind with a deeper part of this wisdom that we all have. And they found that when that physicist or that mathematician had this aha moment, the moment they solved a problem, we all know that feeling when the answer just comes to you and you don't know how or why, that the brain waves would take, that the machine that would report the wave activity would take a certain shape. So it would be this sort of thing and then take a shape, aha, and then back to this sort of a thing. That Zen meditators, masters, who could really just on a dime say, I'm meditating. Okay, I'll meditate. Okay, I'll stop. Okay, I'll meditate. And just very quickly move into that place of stillness, or however you want to sort of articulate it, that their brainwave would also take that same shape. And so there was something very interesting and similar going on when you had these aha moments of intellectual activity, but with something deeper happening, right? Because the answer comes to you sometimes and you're not thinking at the moment it does. As well as people who are trained in bringing their mind into states of focus and clarity. So yeah, I think that her work is wonderful. It was one of the early stages of my own introduction to a lot of this stuff, and very, very interesting. One of the things that's interesting is that in Anna Wise's work, she'll talk about how to take the tongue off of the roof of the mouth. Oftentimes, people will be like this, whether they know it or not. It's almost like being in a contracted state where you're breathing here, caught up here, not in your belly. And that sort of enhances the beta activity of the mind. So this sort of thinking part that sometimes can move into worry and stress and all those sorts of things. And she says release the tongue, because when she's doing her research where she's looking at the brain activity, when the tongue is released, there's a drop in beta. Well, many mindfulness practices have it where when you are, or meditative practices rather, have it that where you are moving into that, it's suggested to put your tongue to the roof of your mouth. So I think it's really an interesting thing. First, it speaks to the fact that this is a science, but it's also a developing science, right? It also speaks to the paradoxes, the things that we're exploring and then we're finding about the things that we thought. I mean, the fact that 50 years ago, if you were suggesting as a researcher neuroplasticity, you would be shunned from the community, right? You could not get something published, and worse, you might not ever be given a serious read again, right? And here we are today where it's the most interesting cutting-edge work that there is. There's still a lot of questions about mind and brain and consciousness and the relationship to consciousness to brain. So these are still ripe questions that are open to be explored as time passes. But nonetheless, the tongue, do you put it to the roof of the mouth or don't you? And it's not like it has to be during meditation. The work that I do, I'm interested in having people in the midst of their day, when they're on the phone and somebody's yelling at them, or they're getting ready to have it out with somebody because they're so frustrated, or they're just feeling whatever they might be feeling. What can they do in that moment to transform that moment from one that is acting on them and they are reacting to it, to one where they're engaged and alive in the moment? And what we're now learning about the neuroscience is that if you can make that shift, you begin to reroute the pathways of the mind that historically have been conditioned to just keep doing that antagonistic, uncomfortable for everybody way of reacting, and it can become an even more vibrant and even more effective reconditioning of the brain, especially if you can do it during those challenging moments. So, this would be interesting, just as a simple little device. If your tongue is at the roof of your mouth, do you lower it? Is that going to suggest a lowering of beta? And my gut feeling is that yes, it's probably not a bad idea to do if you do. And then when you want to move into a state of concentrated awareness, because meditation is not about zoning out. Meditation is about zoning in. And if you're going to really bring your awareness to something in particular, right, and hold it there, and maintain that single point of concentration, you want to have your thinking mind, you want to have a certain quality of cognition and awareness and attention deliberately brought to and sustained in a certain place. And it might be that revving up a certain aspect of cognition, a certain aspect of the mind, and the cortex, frontal cortex, is important in that regard. So it's interesting the way this relaxation and this being really present for your life as it's unfolding in the courtroom, right, with a client, right, at home with your family or with friends, or just when you're with yourself. How do we do this in a way, given what we're learning, that can really enhance the fulfillment of these moments in our lives? So one of the interesting things about mindfulness meditation is some work that Dan Siegel over at UCLA is doing. Dan Siegel is this wonderful researcher. He's a psychiatrist. He's done a lot of work with children and parenting. He's also been very taken by mindfulness and has been weaving the two together in ways that's very interesting. There's also another researcher, Jeffrey Schwartz, out there who's doing this phenomenal stuff as well. I mean, it's amazing when you've got these researchers who are deeply rooted in the science, who are also taken by, right, this contemplative aspect, probably because of some aspects of its play in their own life. So one of the things that has been found is that mindfulness meditative practices will stimulate neuronal activation and growth. So when we deliberately bring our attention to something, when we choose to attend to the pen, we can look at the pen, and then we can know that we're looking at the pen, and we can really choose to look at the pen, think about the pen, and keep the pen there, or a part of our body, or something that we're working on. We can deliberately bring our attention to something and hold it there. When that happens, it stimulates neuronal activation and growth, and in particular, a part of the brain called these middle prefrontal regions, just here behind the forehead, that then extend out axonal fibers that then link together disparate regions of the brain, like the frontal cortex to the limbic system, which is the emotional center of the brain, also has the hippocampus, to the brainstem, the regulation of breathing and heart rate, etc., and then even to the body proper, because as we all know, gut feelings are in fact gut feelings, and that what happens in the viscera of the body then comes back up and is fed into the brain for being able to really integrate the wholeness of who we are, if we have that sort of capacity to do so, or we all do, but to the extent that we can enhance it, all the more wisdom and intuition that can flow moment by moment.